So kicking things off, I'll be doing a review of the newest album from Chicago singer slash songwriter slash producer slash multi-instrumentalist C.W. Franz, entitled C.W. Franz IX. Though I came in a year too late to the beginning of C.W. Franz's self-titled album series, forgive me folks, my Fiverr gig didn't exist back then, my official introduction to Franz's music came in the form of 2020's C.W. Franz II, an instrumental evocation of memories related to the American Midwest. From there, I've covered every C.W. Franz installment up to this point, experiencing and pretty much documenting the unique concepts, various emotions, and degrees of musical experimentation along the way. C.W. Franz III and C.W. Franz VI are currently my top two favorites, the former being an elegy for the traditional American restaurant, whose release during the second year of the pandemic made the experience of listening to it all the more heartbreaking, and the latter being a bleak, epic existential journey where time and space were ripped apart in an attempt to find meaning within the banality of modern day life. Now, back when I reviewed 6 and interviewed CW himself on my podcast, I assumed there was nowhere else for the series to go. And then CW Franz 7 and 8, Adrift and Hoping, dropped, bringing things literally back down to earth. Acting as two sides of the same coin, day and night if you will, given their contrasting album covers, 7 and 8 saw CW moving optimistically forward in his life through a new relationship, leaving behind a dark path of broken hearts and unforgivable mistakes. And now we have CW Franz 9, the 9th chapter of this ongoing series, once again boasting an eclectic cast of guest performers and a striking album cover designed by KM Designs. And in order to describe the experience I had with this record prior to doing this review, I have to talk about that cover. With the first few listens I gave this album, my mind kept zeroing in on two things, the production and that cover. Bear in mind folks that I was simply basking in the sound and tuning into the vibe of the record without thinking too much about what was going on thematically and lyrically. But I felt there was something missing, or at least something that didn't grab me during those first few listens. I went back to that cover and then I noticed something I didn't before. 2 birds, each perched on a tree on opposite sides of the forest portrait serving as the album art, and that was when the album finally clicked for me. Playing almost like a trequel to 7 and 8, CW Franz 9 is a breakup record, which is admittedly nothing new in CW's expansive discography. And yet with the more listens I gave it after that mind-blowing reveal of the birds in the album art, I couldn't help but see it as a turning point in CW's musical career, where he takes all of the stylistic practices and thematic fascinations that he's been honing on and pondering on for the past 5 years and combining them into a stunningly cohesive whole. The first half opens with an archival recording of the Steamboat Bill refrain made famous through the iconic Disney cartoon Steamboat Willie. Not only does that sample reflect CW's deep interest in American history and the reverberations of its past upon modern society, but it sets up the album's main symbol, a bird. Now you're probably asking yourself, but isn't it an animated mouse that does the whistling? My response to that is, isn't that cartoon now accessible through the public domain? Think about it. And on a side note, it's funny how this album takes us off the yacht from the album cover of 8 and onto a metaphorical steamboat in a matter of seconds. Anyway, flying over home, thinking of you, kickstart with some gentle strumming courtesy of CW's beloved Texaco oil Canocaster, which evolves into a warm, pleasant duet with guest artist Michael Wookie on Marxophone. Going back to the album cover, this moment feels like the musical backdrop to a cinematic establishing shot involving that forest from the album art. Roughly around the 2:45 mark, CW starts singing, and as short of a verse he gives in this first half, it packs a lot of emotional punch. The album's premise is laid out. 3 days have passed, and his romantic partner has left the temporary nest with no indication of returning. CW mentions Steamboat Willie in the third bar, which I interpreted as him expressing how he feels the complete opposite of how carefree Mickey Mouse was in that cartoon. In the permanent affection half of the track, we get another fantastic duet between CW and Michael, with some Igbo use from the latter in the background. CW returns to the bird metaphors, singing about how the audacious starling and chickadee flies over home to the nest where they feel they should be. He ends the verse with a tear-inducing farewell of sorts to his former partner, effectively setting up the record's poignant tone. The following track, No Worries, opens with a soft duet between CW and classical guitarist Nathan Wilson. CW's undulating pace creates this weird sense of dread, as if he fears the reminiscence he's about to embark on in this track will hurt him. And yet he receives some much-needed support from Nathan, alongside guest pianist Nehemias Texeira, if I got the name wrong, forgive me, on the Yamaha P95. All three instrumentals combine into a stirring soundscape, which takes up the rest of the song. And during that section, CW delivers a short and genuinely heartwarming recollection of specific memories, evoking the mental retreats into happier times prevalent on CW Franz IX and 2023's American Byways, featuring the big blue stems. And in those happy, burn-free moments of No Worries, CW had nowhere somewhere else to be. I really love that line, and didn't worry enough then of his own limitations, imperfections, and, in an emotionally captivating moment, his own self. Up next is his second two-part track, Got Troubles / Got Mine, whose first part begins with what sounds like a bluegrass-like melody made up of CW's vibrant strumming and the big blue stem's own Rodnell Matos' playful plucking of the mandolin, with some 6-string fretless electric bass support from guest bassist Hexaphus. Another memory, just as vague as the ones on No Worries, is brought up in song, but it's clear that CW's singing about his ex here. He recalls a moment where he's deathly afraid of something and she was there at that time to support him. Afterwards, CW's Canocaster playing slows down to a crawl, then picks back up to signify the start of the track's second half, Got Mine. The bluegrass-like melody restarts, this time in a slightly different pitch, then slows down after a while for CW to finish his story. A callback to one of the main themes of CW Franz VII, he reminds himself of how he emotionally mistreated his former partner. Perhaps out of fear of his own future, he proceeded to shut her out of his life, ultimately resulting in their separation. And in the track's final moments, he summarizes that outcome in both a regretful and indifferent manner by saying, "Some things don't last." Similar to the sonic experimentation on CW Franz II and CW Franz V, CW incorporates some non-American instruments into this record via the following track, Shaker Symmetry. Thanks to Marian Banan on oud and longtime collaborator Ronaldo Ocando on darbuka, finger cymbals, and vibroslap, percussion is finally added to the album's instrumental palette. Throughout this track, we're treated to this exotic and slightly sensual mix of Canocaster, darbuka, finger cymbals, vibroslap, oud, and Hexaphus's electric bass guitar. Seemingly intoxicated by the vibe of the production, CW starts praising his former partner's external and internal beauty. I especially love how the oud makes his introduction in the final line of the first verse between addressing and unjust policy. In the second verse, he confesses that he still finds her perfect in his eyes, encircled and flanked by other perfect ones. I love that line as well. The following lines add some depth to his perspective on their past relationship. I give so much to you that I don't think enough for myself. And similar to the opening lines of the track Northern California Blues off his recently released record Solo Again, CW closes this song with a self-aware couplet. It's all the same tune, in a similar mode. It's been that way as long as I can remember. We then get the two-part, two-track final act and album highlight, Orc and Chickadee. Part 1 opens with 2 repeated notes from CW's Canocaster, amplified for a few seconds with a droning reverb before settling into a fully fleshed out melody. In a moment of pure brilliance, a double bass from guest artist Bruno De La Rosa creeps into the mix, establishing the sweeping, epic feel this particular song will treat us to. After the 3:10 mark, CW delivers a superbly written first verse centered on mending a broken heart while selling hearts on Valentine's Day that is nothing short of heart-rending. Ajayi Desai, if I got the name wrong, please forgive me, who appeared on CW Franz V, adds some tabla to the second verse, right where CW mentions how she found that his words had beauty. And then in a truly powerful moment, CW looks inward and declares that he'll open his heart out to her so she can see what she knows. Heavenly moments. In other words, instead of bottling them up, he'll express these moments to her through song. And from that revelation, CW's strumming increases, building into a heavenly crescendo alongside the tabla and double bass. And then out of nowhere, guest performer Jose David shows up on timpani to guide the song into this wondrous climax. In the context of this record, this bird is going to sing his heart out, with the hope that his former mate flies towards his nest at just the right time to hear him. And just when your tear ducts have had enough, part 2 begins. And I love how it just starts with no build-up or hesitation. Energized by the exuberance of part 1, CW and Hexafist perform this joyous duet with some support from the midpoint onward by Rodnell Matos, who delivers a gorgeous solo via his mandolin. CW proceeds with a final tribute to his ex, appreciating the memories they continue to hold close to their hearts. And on the ambiguous closing line, "The rest is for ours to claim," we're left with the hope that these two birds will continue to be a part of each other's lives, regardless of the nest they call home. And speaking of birds, the album's outro involves a field recording of nature sounds, reminiscent of the ones used in CW Franz IV, presumably from a forest similar to the one in the album art. On the Bandcamp liner notes, CW states that this album was recorded in 3 days and then meticulously thought about for 3 months. Initially, he was going to record it with just his voice and improvise Canocaster compositions, but something told him to sit with it for a while. And I could safely say that it was a great thing he did, because the end result is arguably the best entry in the CW Franz series and his best album thus far. Also, according to the liner notes, CW Franz IX is described as a labor of love, and it absolutely shows. From the artwork and lyrics to the mood and sound of each song, everything feels thoughtful and emotionally driven. But the two standout aspects of this album are its themes and overall musical execution. Drawing from his collaborations with other artists on American Byways, his Orange Diamond and Wells House jam sessions, and some of his previous CW Franz records, CW managed to get the best out of his long-distance musical collaborators. You could tell they deeply understood the album's themes of heartbreak, forgiveness, and moving forward, and as a result, they projected that understanding into every note they played. And I'll make the argument that even if you've never listened to a CW Franz album before, self-titled or otherwise, the themes are so relatable and the music is so refined and well arranged, you can easily get into the vibe of this record. So I guess for me, great things really do come in threes, or in the case of this album, multiples of 3, because now CW Franz IX stands tall as my top favorite in the self-titled series, with 6 and 3 in the second and third spots respectively. And like 6, I really don't know how or if it's possible at all for CW to top what he did here in this latest installment. I guess we'll see when X is released, but for now, CW Franz IX is one of the year's best records and it gets my highest recommendation. So yeah, this is kind of a first for me. I'm giving this a 10 out of 10. I absolutely love this record. It's available right now on Spotify and on CW's official Bandcamp page. And in the case of the latter, please check that out for all of his other albums and EPs and singles. And yeah, show CW some support and love, man. And yeah, that's pretty much about it. So this wraps up my review of CW Franz IX, one of the year's best records. I strongly recommend you check it out.